Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second rundown of the United States presidential debate in 2024. In this case, there was a little bit of a change from the first one, which was actually Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. This is Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. So the Democratic Party changed its nominee because I guess Joe Biden isn't fit to be president for a second term. Um, well, anyway, yeah, that whole Biden situation, I guess they came out with a documentary talking about how it was like one of the toughest decisions for him. And I think they've even, let me speak a little bit on Biden. Excuse me. They've called him the tragedy president or something like that because he, if you guys know, in the 70s, he lost his wife and his daughter, I think, in a car accident. And then his two sons survived. And then he lost one of his sons, like in 2015, while he was in office. Like he's lost family members. So that's kind of why they call him like the tragedy president or somewhere along those lines. But anyway, in this debate, we started out with Kamala Harris on the right of the screen and Donald Trump on the left of the screen. And well, we had the two moderators, which were David and Lindsay. Kamala Harris comes out into the scene, and so does Donald Trump. Donald Trump kind of walks out like, kind of saying like, this is what I got. Like this was the vibe that I got, and body language wise, I kind of felt like Donald Trump was like, this is my adversary. I'm kind of like measuring you. Um, and Kamala Harris kind of walked out there like confidently. She was like heading towards Donald Trump. I think she wanted to like, give him a handshake, and Donald Trump just kind of like went into, behind his podium, and Kamala Harris was like, no, like you're gonna, shake my hand, like, and I guess this is kind of because they hadn't met before. This was the first time that they were meeting, that they were talking, and it was in a debate. um, so that's why everybody was kind of like very interested in the debate, like, oh, this is the first time they're gonna be talking to each other. And then Kamala Harris walks up to Donald Trump. She goes, Kamala Harris, like, this is me, like I'm introducing myself, which I thought was very respectful. I thought it was kind of disrespectful for Donald Trump not to, he's a businessman. I think he can read body language peripherally also. And if you see someone like coming up to you, that you're just, that you're gonna debate against, well, they probably want to shake your hand. And it's like, why wouldn't you just like shake hands like in front of like the podiums, right? He goes behind his podium. I thought it was kind of disrespectful. And then Kamala, goes, Kamala Harris, let's have a good debate. And Donald Trump says, I think he says, nice seeing you. Have fun, right? And then Kamala goes, thank you. And Donald goes, thank you, which I didn't really understand why Trump said thank you. It's those type of things where when people are like, the waiter comes to your table and says, enjoy your meal. And you're like, you too, thank you. It's like, but the waiter's not eating. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Like why wouldn't they just like, I think Biden and Trump didn't even like shake hands in the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to get into the topics and what they talked about chronologically. I'm going to try to go through it as fast as I can because I have 4 pages of info. And honestly, if I miss some stuff, I think the first rundown I did between Trump and Biden, I was more aware. This rundown, I wasn't really in the mood of doing it, but since I did the first one, I kind of felt like I needed to do the second one. So attention wise, I wasn't really there. But I did try to do my best job at it. All right. So first off, the topics weren't really clear as they were in the first debate. The first debate was like, okay, abortion, okay, economy, okay, immigration. This one was kind of like, I felt like the moderators just kind of asked some questions, and I'll get into the moderators in a moment because they started to kind of like confront the people, which I thought was interesting. Obviously, a lot of people on social media immediately said Trump's getting attacked. It's three versus one. I don't know if it was really three versus one. I saw the moderators active, and this was different from the first debate because in the first debate, the moderators were not participating. I thought it was interesting because it's like, okay, if you guys are gonna like follow up, because supposedly they were supposed to fact check like things that they were that the candidates were saying. And social media obviously was like, yeah, they were biased, they weren't fact checking this stuff, like Charlottesville, things like that, things that Trump said, which I think that is also true. So there was bias from the moderators, but they did kind of try to keep it like neutral. But the problem with asking questions or confronting the candidates, I think, is that you can come off as biased, and then there's really no way to really evaluate fairness. Like, okay, you asked him a question that was like a hardball question, that was a very complex question, and then, like, for example, with Ukraine and Russia, they asked Trump, like, how do you plan to do you think it's important for Ukraine to win the war? And Trump didn't fall into the trap. He was like, bro, it's important to end the war, right? And he didn't answer if it was important for Ukraine to win the war, which I think was kind of like a trick question. And then the when they referred to Kamala, they were just like, how would you deal with Putin or something like that? And it's like, like you notice the bias there, right? Okay, so economy is the first topic, I guess. And in this case, Kamala, right off the bat, mentions that Trump has tax cuts or has done tax cuts. So again, a lot of these issues, topics were kind of like hashed out. They were from the previous debate. So I felt like a lot of stuff was repetitive. I also watched one of Trump's latest interviews with Lex Friedman, and Kamala Harris's like super edited interview with her vice president nominee or candidate. I think that's on BBC, on ABC, or I don't know, one of those like news networks. And a lot of the stuff they said there, they like repeated it or they talked about it in the debate. So then Trump answers no. He says that it's not tax cuts, that it's tariffs, and then he gets into immigration and criminals. And I was like, whoa, like, why don't you just stay on topic? Like, and he, right off the bat, he was like immigration. And Trump honestly sounded like a broken record throughout the debate. Just immigration, criminals, immigration, criminals, immigration, criminals. And, when they weren't even talking about immigration or crime, and he just kept bringing that back up, and what I think about that, it's a way to really drill it into people's heads, but it can also get annoying and exhausting. This was a rhetoric that Kamala Harris used, and I think she used it effectively, like basically insinuating that Trump is that old, exhausting rhetoric, because Trump was like, I think in politics people like the new, because the new has the potential to be good, and people tend to kind of like shy away or want to distance themselves from the old, right? And that's basically defined by the moment, by the time. So Trump 2016 is news, right? Trump 2020, he's still new. Trump 2024, he's kind of becoming old news, right? And yeah, I guess like Mexico had its first like woman president, and then the US is kind of falling behind on that, right? So maybe they try to like get Kamala to be like the first woman president. Okay, so anyway, from here, Kamala responds by saying that Trump left and that basically unemployment was a mess. She right off the bat mentions Project 2025, which I was like, really? Like that? I'm not really sure what Project 2025 is, but it sounds like a conspiracy theory. Trump totally denies that. He says, I don't even know what it is either. And, like, don't associate me with it because, I have nothing to do with it. Then Trump gets mixed up. Okay, Trump made a couple mistakes in the debate, and this is one of them. he gets mixed up with before the pandemic and then when he left office. So he says, he says, when I left office, we had the best numbers. Um, and then he says, before the pandemic, which was before he left office, but a little bit before that, we had good numbers, but then the pandemic caused that to basically go down. So it's like, wait, so did you leave off on good terms or not? And was it because of the pandemic that you didn't leave on good terms, or like, he kind of made him, Trump was kind of tired. I felt he did get a little bit emotional. I felt like he was angry at times. um, and he also mentions the tax cuts. He seems angry. I don't really know if I felt like he wasn't in his zone. And Kamala Harris, before the debate, I was listening to the people like talking about the debate, like the pre-debate game or whatever, and they were saying how Kamala prepared for it. She had like people, I guess, dress up, or a person dress up as Donald Trump. She did a lot of mock debates, and she did seem prepared. So Trump is like at this level, let's say, and Kamala, let's say she's like at this level because she doesn't really have like experience being like a public image. So then her preparation brought her to the same level as Donald Trump. But if you ask me who won the debate, I mean, Trump didn't make an effort. He just went in there and winged it, and he repeated a lot of the things, right? And Kamala seemed really prepared, but they were just at that level. I felt that if Trump would have prepared, he would have been able to beat Harris, but like he didn't even know who Harris was. He didn't even do any research on it. And you can tell in the debate because, Ben Shapiro was like tweeting on Facebook, like, mention this, mention that. And Trump was like, I don't even know, like, who you are, like, whatever, And he just kept saying, like, immigration and whatever. And Kamala, like, was there, like, going head to head, toe to toe with him. Um, but yeah, I'm not like, if you ask me who won the debate, I would be like, man, I really don't know. Like, Kamala was prepared, Trump wasn't. For me, that's a big deal, but that's more subjective. I think from an objective standpoint, they both threw blows. They both had like mistakes, but I would say they were pretty like equal, I guess, in that term. In that term. Then Kamala mentions some schools, right? These were like the blows because she mentions specific schools, and she says that if Trump would be president again, or if Trump is president again, inflation would basically increase, and that would provoke a recession. And then she starts drilling this idea, which I guess it was true, and Trump made a big mistake later on, where Kamala basically says that Trump has no plan, right, for the presidency. Trump then says he went to Barton, one of the schools that Kamala mentions, and he says that his professors supported him, and they continue to support him. Kamala says that we're going to be hearing lies coming from Trump all night, things like this. Trump says that she's the one who doesn't have a plan, and that she's copying Biden, basically, right? So they kind of throw this back and forth. Kamala, right off the bat, starts off with some ideas for economy, like giving, I guess, couples that have a kid for the first time, like a year of money or something like that. Like she has like some ideas, and then Trump does the biggest bluff of them all, or the biggest blunder of them all, which is say that he doesn't have a plan, but he has the concepts of a plan because he's not in office yet, which is basically like going to a job interview and saying, I don't have my degree yet, or I don't have the training skills I need for the job yet. But if I get the job, then I'll go and get the skills I need for the job. And it's kind of like, that's not really how it works. You can't be that pragmatic. Like you need to have those skills even if you don't get the job, right? But it's Trump. So then Trump talks about a national sales tax. Trump says that China will have higher taxes, not the U.S., again with the tariffs. And he reminds that the Biden administration hasn't cut off the tariffs. So the same rhetoric, the same arguments from the first debate against Biden, right? Like they're still using Trump's tariffs, basically. Kamala says it's really the idea of trade wars that is introduced, not so much that the U.S. is doing better, but that they're basically they have like the world has all these like trade wars going on, or the U.S. like with China. And she says that Trump sold China military chips instead of focusing on America and relationships, and that Trump even went as far as to thank President Xi. So in this case, obviously, from the Democratic standpoint, and compared to the first debate, she's throwing like massive blows, and Trump did have a lot to like respond to. Like it was more active than the first debate, obviously. And Kamala says this a lot about how Trump basically treats politics or relationships with other countries as like if they're favors or like businessmen, instead of like trying to develop relationships with the rest of the world, right? And then Trump says that she's using Trump's philosophy at this point, that Kamala Harris is using Trump's philosophy, and that she's actually a Marxist because her grandfather was a Marxist, socialist, communist. And Trump keeps bringing up immigration like this, so he keeps sounding like a broken record player. Then the next topic is abortion. In this case, Trump says that he was pro life, but should people trust Trump on abortion? Because he has changed his mind a lot on this topic. And he justifies this, but he is a Gemini, and he does have a reputation now of changing his mind, here and there. But also Kamala, because Kamala Harris is a Libra, they're both air signs, so they're both intellectual signs, and intellectual signs tend to say one thing and do one thing, and then turn around and say and do another thing, right? Because they're always thinking, and oh, now I know this, so now I have to do this. And like she says this a lot about how her policies have changed, right? Harris's policies have changed, but not her values. And it's kind of like, well, that's that doubtful Libra in her. So then they get into the whole abortion ordeal for a minute there. They're talking about abortion in the ninth month. Is it fine in the seventh and the eighth month? Trump says that Kamala says it. They bring up these things like abortion should be done in case of rape, incest, or if the life of the mother is in danger. And then I think this is where Lindsay, one of the moderators, gets in and says that there is no state where they kill the baby after it is born, because at one point I think Trump says that even after the baby's born, they kill it, or they kill him or her, the baby. And she fact checks this, but like towards Trump. And at this point, I was like, whoa, are they like just gonna go after Trump? But then eventually they go after Harris too. But again, this is like that whole moderator intervention. It's interesting because I don't know if it works, right? I didn't think it worked for this debate. Let me just make that clear, because there was no clear. Like I said, how are you gonna evaluate what's fair? If you're favoring, or if you're basically challenging or defying too much a candidate. If, like, let's say one candidate is always telling the truth and the other one's always lying, and you're constantly challenging, that's just going to look bad, right? So then they talk about the Trump abortion bans, which I didn't even know were a thing. And Kamala here gives some concrete examples. I think this is like one of her best moments, because she gets really passionate about it. She starts giving concrete examples of women in like the hospitals, like waiting to get permission to get an abortion, bleeding on the medical beds, things like this. And my conclusion here is that I think they both have weak and strong points, talking points. And abortion is obviously a weak talking point for Trump, because at this point he was just kind of like, crap, like I don't even know what to say to all that stuff, right? Because Kamala really did get into like this appeal to the emotional side of things, and she did a good job in that at that point. She kind of stumbled a lot here and there, and she did kind of seem nervous, especially in the beginning, kind of like Biden. And Trump, he always seemed like self-confident. But yeah, so Trump says he's not signing a ban. Trump says that the topic was brought back into the states, but sounds repetitive because he keeps saying this over and over again. saying that the student loans also, he starts talking about student loans were a catastrophe. And here he's just using like adjectives. And I thought at this point it wasn't really working for him to be using like these adjectives to just describe things, like, like say something else, right? Mm, Trump doesn't answer questions about the I think like some bill getting vetoed, or vetoing some bill, because he says that Kamala wouldn't get the votes in this case. I think this is purely political stuff. I didn't really understand what they were talking about here, so they just kind of like went back and forth here, like, arguing basically. They weren't really debating about abortion; they were just arguing. And then the moderator Lindsay is asking some questions. Kamala asks if he would veto, and Trump asks if abortion would be allowed in the seventh, eighth month. There's really no conclusion to the whole abortion thing, and they were trying to like. They were trying to keep talking. They wanted to keep talking about these things. Like one, like, the other one was responding to the other one. A lot of this happened throughout the debate, and the moderators were just like, okay, they just kept saying, we have a lot to get to. We have a lot to get to. We have a lot to get to. And sometimes, like Kamala or Trump, more Trump than Kamala, I think Kamala only did it once, would be like, no, 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 no. Let me respond to this. I have to respond to this. And the moderators would just shut up, right? But other times they would like move on. Then they get into immigration. They talk about the illegal border crossings. And David at this point says that illegal immigration was just stopped like a couple months, 6 months, I think, prior to the elections. Kamala says that she has prosecuted transnational criminals. Again, this is something that she said in her interview with her vice president candidate. And Kamala throws trash at Trump's rallies. So I thought this was funny because she's saying like people leave Trump's rallies early because they can't stand to just listen to him, like, say the same things over and over again. Like, this was another one of those blows that she gave. Trump says that people don't go to her rallies, so he counterattacks, and that she actually has to pay people to go to her rallies. And this is because Kamala says that Trump keeps talking about immigration when that's not the subject, and that he talks about imaginary people like Hannibal Lecter at his rallies, right? Which in this case, he only brought up the I got shot once, which I thought was a good thing. Like, don't bring it up a lot. He only mentioned it once. And then he says that, I think he said something about like the US is going to be like Venezuela on steroids, and that people are eating dogs, which was basically trending on Twitter. And then David says that there's no evidence for that, and they just kind of go back and forth on it, which there is evidence. I think there's a case or two that people have been eating dogs. And then Kamala talks about how she has 200 Republicans endorse her. Kamala talks bad about Trump, and in this case, hold on, talks bad about Trump's people. Oh yeah, Trump's people talking smack, and Trump responds by saying, "Oh yeah," she starts talking about how people in his cabinet have spoken ill of Trump, and he answers by saying, "Well, I actually fired those people because they were inefficient, ineffective, and you guys don't fire people like the people that you have for the economy or for Afghanistan." And then he brings up like he brought up Afghanistan, I think, like a good amount of times, right? It wasn't so repetitive, but he did mention it like just enough times, like Afghanistan was a disaster, Afghanistan was a disaster. Where Kamala later responds by saying that he had contact with the Taliban, and then Trump says that he had contact with Abdul, and people were like on Twitter saying that that's not even the name of the leader of the Taliban or something like that. And then Trump says that he has a deportation proposal, and he plans to use the National Guard to deport 11 million people, because again, this is making reference to like all of the illegal immigrants that have entered the U.S. in Joe Biden's administration. And Trump says that this causes letting millions of people come in is causing crime to go up in the U.S. and down all over the world. He basically like migrant crime, and the FBI says that it is coming down. David, the moderator, responds to this, and then Trump counterattacks. Like he starts debating with the moderator, and then Trump says that they didn't include the top crime cities, which again I think this is the moderator's fault because they shouldn't be arguing with the candidates. They should just fact check and like show it maybe on the screen or something like that. Like I don't think they should like debate with the candidates. And then Kamala mentions Trump's prosecution, the criminal his criminal sentencing is in November, which I was like, whoa. The rule of law. Kamala talks about tired rhetoric and looking for people's needs. So she shifts the attention of like this, Trump's rhetoric of being a badass into like we need to look after people's needs, take care of the elderly, like more of the democratic emotional arguments, which I think Biden couldn't even say like during his debate. And then Trump says that those were cases that were started by the Democrats, the prosecution cases, and that he's winning them, and that they have weaponized the Department of Justice against him. Right? He says they're fake cases, and then they get into fracking. I guess this is the topic. See, there wasn't really like a division of topics, but I guess then they start getting into fracking. I don't even know what fracking is. I had to look it up, but I guess it's like drilling oil. It has something to do with oil or petroleum. And this is the part where Kamala says that her values have not changed, but her policies have. Lindsay asks her about this, which again, this is like excuse me, the moderators confronting the candidates. They do it to both, right? But was there a bias? Was there a prejudice? Well, yeah, kind of. Kamala says that she will not ban it. She talks about $400 million, and that she starts throwing dirt at Trump in this case, talking about how Trump basically is like a nepo baby, that he got $400 million from his dad, and yet he filed for bankruptcy 4 times. And then she starts speaking about her values from her childhood, which basically is like looking after people and protecting people. And she talks about lifting people up and not beating them up, which I thought was like a good rhetoric. This is something that she said before, and especially the other part, where she says, well, we'll get to that in a moment, but about we have more things that unite us, or we have more in common than things that divide us, right? Which I think is kind of like true, right? It's like a good thing to say. Then Trump says he was given a fraction of that money, not like the 400 million, and that he's basically made like his own living by himself. He's been successful on his own, not thanks to his family or connections or his dad. Or I'm like, bro, you got connections. Like your dad had connections. Like even if you didn't have that much money, you still had connections. Like connections are everything. It's more than money, right? Trump says Kamala was big on the defund the police thing, and there was a little awkward moment where Trump, right at this point, Kamala interrupts Trump, because when Trump's talking, when Kamala's talking, Trump isn't looking at her. He's looking like straight ahead. But then when Trump's talking, Kamala like kind of like Biden would look at Trump and just kind of like shake her head, and be like, and she would actually talk. So she was saying stuff, and at one point her mic was off, but you could see her mouth moving, and Trump like stops what he's saying, and he's like, don't interrupt me, and Kamala Harris is like, whoa. And Trump was like, and he pauses, he's like, don't interrupt me. He's like, and that was like a little awkward moment, because I was like, what? Like just how I thought in the first debate that Biden was gonna like punch Trump, like just go across the stage and punch Trump. In this one, I kind of felt like Trump was gonna go across the stage and like punch Kamala Harris, like like you just felt that intensity and that vibe, and I was like, what? And then so she interrupts Trump. Trump says no, and they talk about Trump says he's all for solar power. I guess at this point they're talking about climate change, and he says it's a hot topic among young people. And then he says that he's all for solar power, but that it takes it takes around 400 to 500 acres for solar power to actually work, or something like that. So it's not really like cost effective, I guess. And then they get into January 6th. I was like, how is January 6th even like a debate topic? Like, shouldn't they just be talking about neutral things like education, immigration, you know? But they talk about January 6th. They're always bringing up January 6th, and Trump was just kind of like pissed off. At this point, I did kind of felt like the moderators were just like blatantly attacking Trump. Trump says that he mentioned a peaceful protest, you know, no violence, and then he goes into attacking the Democrats again, and Kamala in this case, with allowing illegals, calls Kamala the border czar in this case, which he said before. But he only mentions this once. And Trump sounds political in this case because he doesn't answer the January 6th questions. The January 6th question was just basically, do you regret anything from January 6th? He gets asked this question again from David, the moderator. Is there anything you regret about that day? And he says he had nothing to do with that, right? That it was done by other people. Trump blames Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of New York for not sending in more security, I guess. And Kamala says that Trump incited a mob in that case. Kamala brings up Charlottesville and that the thing that he said about there were fine people on both sides. Where in this case, if you watch the video, which was trending on social media and Twitter, he says not the neo-Nazis and not the Proud Boys and all those people, but like just people that were fine people, I guess. And then Trump says that there would be a bloodbath, but Trump says that he was talking about another thing, which Twitter was fact checking all this, and then people on Twitter were saying the people that were supposed to be fact checking weren't even fact checking for Trump, right? They were just letting all those like lies go there, or misinformation or misunderstandings. And then he brings up immigration again. So his go-to card is like always immigration. Trump says that Biden. Trump at one point says, Kamala, you should go and wake up Biden at 4 in the afternoon to go sign that bill, right? And then again, this is another debate topic by the moderators, which I thought was kind of absurd. The winning by a whisker comment, where in this case Trump says that he said that sarcastically, and then they get into the whole idea of Trump says that he won. He says we need walls and good elections in the country, those two things. And basically when I win, he said that he would throw the people that like were basically against him, saying that the election was like rigged or that it was a fraud. He basically says that he's going to throw those people in jail or something like that. Trump, I felt like this was a weak point at this stage, because he still says this. He still says that he lost the election, right? And that there's evidence and stuff like that. And you know, I guess there have been investigations and nothing has been found. I don't know. I think that's just a topic that shouldn't really be talked about. And he talks about 81 million people fired. Oh yeah, Kamala answers by saying 81 million people fired you, right? Fired Trump. Kamala says that she has talked to world leaders and that they think he is a disgrace, and that Trump doesn't have the temperament to see the facts, like in this case that he lost the 2020 election. And Trump says that Hungary's president, and this was like one of the blows that Trump says, because I think it's very important for you to mention concrete people, places, statistics, right? And he says Hungary's president, like specifically Hungary's president, or someone like that, said that Trump is feared and that basically we need that back in the world, right? And then he calls Biden weak and pathetic. And then Trump says that Biden actually hates Kamala, which I thought was, this was kind of getting like dirty in this case, because it's like, well, Biden's the president. At one point, Trump was like, is Biden even the president? Where is he? Like, what's going on? Like, we don't even know what's going on with Biden anymore, which is kind of true and funny. But yeah, like calling the sitting president weak and pathetic, I think was like, oh, dang. All right, then they get into Israel, Hamas, and the hostages. Kamala says that Israel has the right to defend itself. She'll continue to support Israel, but how we do it or how the U.S. does it is important. They ask her how would she do it, and Kamala then mentions October 7th, which is like a trending topic. Trump, Trump at this point, he was looking at the clock, or he was looking up a lot. I noticed that. And Kamala says that a two-state solution is necessary, and that she will give Israel the ability to defend itself again. But the two-state solution, I don't know. That's been on the table for like 30 years, I think, or more. Clinton couldn't do it. Bush couldn't do it. Obama couldn't do it. Trump didn't do it, right? Because he was president. Biden didn't do it. Trump says then that Putin would have never gone to Ukraine, that he went, that again, this was from the first debate, that Putin saw the opportunity to get into Ukraine because of the Afghanistan retreat, right? And Trump says that Kamala didn't want to meet with Netanyahu, and that Kamala actually hates the Israelis and the Arabs, which I was like, what? And then Iran, Trump says that Iran was broke with him, and that now it has money with Kamala, and that this was something that even the moderators that were there covered. At one point, Trump says, "You covered it, David. You know Iran has money now," which they actually say Iran has money. I'm not sure what's happened with Iran, but they say Iran has money because in the Middle East, that land or that territory is where like all the food is grown and then gets shipped out to the rest of the Middle East or something like that. And then they talk about Ukraine and Russia. Trump says he will have it, and he will have that war finished within 24 hours. Kamala says that that's a lie, and that she hates Israel and calls him weak and wrong on national security, and that he wants to be a dictator one day. Um, no, I guess that it's a lie that she hates Israel, right? I guess she didn't say that it was a lie that she hated the Arabs. I'm not really sure. And then she also says that Trump has exchanged love letters with Kim Jong Un, and that Trump is actually easily manipulated by the world leaders and these dictators, like North Korean leader and Russian leader, because they do him favors with favors and flattery. And she repeats how military world leaders have called him names, basically like that he's a disgrace. Trump brings back immigration. And then he talks about how Biden approved some Russian pipelines that have extended all the way to Germany or something like that. Then they get into Ukraine. Trump has said that he would solve the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, and that he just wants the war to stop, which again, this was the point where they asked him, like, which I thought was unfair, because they asked him, like, do you think it's important for Ukraine to win the war? And it's like, bro. And then they asked Kamala, how will you deal with Putin? And it's like, that's, it's not the same type of calibrated question, right? Trump says that the Biden administration doesn't ask NATO for any help, basically, and that Trump says he would speak. He said this in the first debate too, how basically he conditions NATO by saying, if you guys don't give us money, we're not going to protect you, and that they start giving him money. And he's like really proud of that achievement that he did with NATO. Trump says that he would speak to one of them first in relation to the Russia-Ukraine war, and then he would speak to the other one, and then that he would get them together. And Trump says that the Democrats basically threw out Biden like a dog out of the campaign, and that not Ukraine, yeah, and the idea that he doesn't answer the question of whether Ukraine needs to win the war, but that the war just needs to end, right? And then ask Kamala how she would deal with Putin. Again, this is the part where they ask her, like, how would you deal with Putin? And why don't they ask her, like, does Ukraine need to win the war, right? Again, there's that idea that, like, if Russia wins with Ukraine, then Kamala says then they will get into Poland and Romania, and that she actually went to Poland and Romania. This was, I think, one of those blows from Kamala, because Trump says she hasn't even, talked to NATO, and she was a bad negotiator. And then Kamala says, I went to Poland and I went to Romania, but it kind of backfires, because then Trump says, yeah, that was like 3 days before Putin invaded, before Russia invaded Ukraine. So she's a bad negotiator. And I guess she didn't really say anything against that. And I was like, oh. She said she went to Poland and Romania to support Ukraine. And she gave Zelensky intelligence that helped out Ukraine. in the war against Russia. She says that Trump would do things for favors, and basically insinuating that Trump's like a businessman, and that they start talking about like, this was, I think, like a funny question, like, would Putin be sitting in Kiev or Moscow? Because Kamala says, yeah, if Trump was president, Putin would be sitting in Kiev, right? And then Trump backfires, or basically answers by saying, if I were in office, Putin would be sitting in Moscow, right? Like where he is president of. And I thought that was just kind of funny. Like, where would Putin, or where is Putin sitting, in Kiev or Moscow? And then Trump says that Putin has nuclear weapons, that people forget about that, and that he might use them. Trump says Kamala went in to negotiate, and that 3 days later the war started. Kamala says that's a lie, and that she only met with Zelensky. And then Kamala talks about principles and not selling them, and being an international leader, which I think this was like a good rhetoric, right? Like, not so much bullying people and pushing them around, but like, basically like trying to develop relationships, and good relationships with other countries. They talk about the Afghanistan withdrawal then, and in this case, Kamala says that the first time, this is the first time, I guess, that no American soldier is in an active war zone. Trump invited the Taliban to Camp David, I guess, and this from a former president. I'm not sure if this is true, but I think Kamala says this. And then Trump says that he got involved with the Taliban, and that Abdul is the head of the Taliban. And this is what I was talking about, how he said this. And then people were fact checking this on Twitter and saying his name's not even Abdul, it's some other name, the head or the leader, supreme leader of Afghanistan or something like that. And that basically Biden, or Trump, sent a picture of his house, of Abdul's house, leader of the Taliban, according to Trump, to the leader, and he says, and that the leader, I guess, Abdul, asked him like, why are you sending me a picture of my house? And that he says, you have to figure that one out for yourself, which like Twitter was saying, oh, that's some gangster shit and things like that. And that Trump gave them a list of things to do, and that the Taliban didn't do it. So I guess if they would have met the requirements, maybe they would have, I don't know, like recognized them as a sovereign nation or something like that. And then they talk about seeing Kamala as black or African American. Trump says that he doesn't care what she used to be. He says that Kamala said she wasn't black like back then, or she wasn't then, and now she is black or something like that for the votes, I guess. And Kamala says he started by owning land and buildings, referring to Trump, and that he wouldn't rent out to black families. She brings up the Central Park Five again, and the birther lies for Obama. And then Trump justifies himself by saying the Central Park Five pled guilty, and that's when he thought that they were guilty because they pled guilty, and then they pled not guilty, and then he was like, oh crap. And he also says that that's old, and there's nothing new for him. There's nothing new to be said about him in terms of like racism, I guess. And then they talk about Biden with inflation, and he says that Kamala is Biden. And that was also trending on Twitter, that Kamala is basically Biden. Then Kamala responds and says that she is not Biden nor Trump, and that she believes in unity and not division. This is kind of when she gets into that headspace of like unity and not division. And she talks, and to talk about a plan to give businesses for young families and for young entrepreneurs, basically give them money. And she starts to say, I have a plan, like I have a dream. I was like, what are you doing? Because she starts to say, I have a plan that this and this and this. I have a plan that this and this. But it kind of sounds like I have a dream. And then I think at one point Trump was like, she doesn't have a plan. She doesn't, or something like that. Trump says that she has no plan to defund the police. And then everybody at this point is just talking, and it gets like chaotic. And they bring up the fact, yeah, it is kind of biased, because the moderators at this point, they talked about January 6th, about Trump not accepting defeat in 2020, and about Trump running for president for a third time. And he gets asked if he has a plan. Then he talks about Obamacare, how it was a disaster. And this is when he mentions the catastrophic, I have concepts of a plan, right? But he's not president yet, he says, which I was like, oh, what? Like, I don't know. I don't know what to think about that because again, I'm a person that believes that people should be prepared, even if you're not sure, you still should prepare. But I personally think at this point, especially with the Economist magazine cover, that Trump is going to win, right? And then Kamala says that she supports private health care. Kamala responds about fracking again. They talk about fracking on and off all of a sudden here and there and not wanting to take people's guns away because I guess Trump says that she wants to take people's guns away. Kamala says that Trump has no plan. And then I guess we're talking about health care. She says she's going to strengthen affordable health care plan and access to health care should be a right, she says. And then Trump says that she made a mistake with John McCain, and they start talking about John McCain. And then they get into climate change, the same question for both of them. What would you do for it? Kamala says it's real, and she says, ask anyone who lives in a state with insurance that gets jacked up because of climate change and the weather patterns, which I thought was interesting. I was like, that's a new take on climate change because I'm not really big for climate change. And she says young people care deeply about it. She will bring back American made products. And both sides say that they have lost, both sides say about the other side that they have both lost manufacturing jobs. And Trump says that the jobs are in Mexico owned by Chinese people, which I thought was interesting. The closing remarks then is Kamala says that we all have more in common than what separates us, which I think was one of my favorite like quotes or sayings from the debate. She has a plan and that she will create an opportunity economy. She only has one client, the people, and she wants to know if you are okay and not whether you are a Republican or a Democrat. And then Trump says he brings out his biggest bazooka shot in this one, which is he asks, why hasn't Kamala done this in the last 3.5 years? Which this was trending on Twitter before the debate, and it has a lot of logic to it. But he only mentioned it once, and I think there's a video on it on YouTube right now on like Trump asking this question, like why hasn't she done it in these 3.5 years, which is like a bazooka of an argument. But he only mentioned it once. Like I thought that was powerful, strong to get everyone together in the White House to do it, right? Like why don't you guys just do it? You're already in the White House. You're vice president right now, currently. And Trump says that the world leaders are coming to him and that nobody knows what's going on. And then he basically finishes off with immigration again and no handshake at the end. So my take on the debate is basically that, like I already mentioned, Kamala was prepared, Trump wasn't prepared, but Trump is Trump. I think the election is going to be won by Trump. That's already decided. Kamala did a good run. I have to say that she was phenomenal. So I do have to, props to her preparation because she did held her own. But whether who won, who lost, I would say it was a pretty tight race. Again, Trump would have been able to win if he would have prepared, but he didn't even care about that because he's probably thinking about some other stuff like, what am I going to do in my first 20 days in office or my first 100 days in office or whatever. Yeah, because he's got that secured. Plus, the U.S. president gets elected not by popular vote, but by the electoral college. So that's decided with politicians, not with the people, right? I learned that back in high school with my civics teacher. But yeah, general views of the debate. I had more fun with the first one. This is like the first time I watched these debates. I felt like this Trump Harris debate was kind of, it could have had more like intense moments, like more moments, because I felt like it was kind of boring, to be honest. It didn't really have a lot of spunk, a lot of like, controversy. Like they just hashed out the same old arguments, the same old ideas. Even the moderators talking about January 6th, talking about abortion, talking about immigration. It's like, why don't you guys talk about like AI? Or why don't you guys talk about like, education. Like, yeah, I think they haven't even touched the topic of education in a debate this year. But yeah, I felt like they could, like catch them off guard, like, you know, like talk about music, like just movies, entertainment, like for both of them to be like, let's see what you know about that, like on the spot without preparing. Um, so yeah, I felt like it was boring, repetitive. Um, Maybe next time I'll only watch like the first debate and not the second one, because even though it was a different person the first time, it was Biden. Imagine if this debate would have been Biden versus Trump part 2. Oh man, it would have been exactly the same as the first one. And the thing that made it a little bit like interesting was that it was Kamala Harris, so it wasn't Biden. But by watching that interview of her, which maybe it was a mistake, a lot of the things she said, again, like with Trump, a lot of the things that he said is just like the same old. Even though Kamala is just starting to talk about all this stuff. um, but yeah, I think fate's sealed. Trump's gonna win. Um, and I think in this debate, Harris did a good job. Props to her. Um, so I guess if you talk in terms of like who won because who was better prepared, we could say Harris. Um, but yeah, Trump is Trump. He's quick on his feet. He thinks fast. He talks fast. So he was able to, like also defend himself, counter argue, counter attack. Um, but yeah, that's my take on this. So let me know what you think. And that's all I got for this video. So I'll see you in the next one. All right. Peace.